Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker and helping if you're scared of many things. And this is about the Tomahawk cruise missile. I just want to help you understand why it's nothing to worry about, because Ukraine's got something much more capable already. So that's the Flamingo cruise missile. So that's probably the only reason that Trump is considering selling it now. And that's why the difference between him and Biden is not that he's different, but because Ukraine has now got the Flamingo. So the Flamingo cruise missile, it got its name because an early version was painted pink accidentally. Anyway, so it's the Flamingo cruise missile, and it can take over a metric ton, 1,125 kilograms, for 3,000 kilometers. It's a cruise missile, and it travels just short of 600 miles per hour. And the Tomahawk is also a cruise missile, and it travels about the same speed, but it's got a shorter range, about 500 kilometers shorter range, and it can only carry less than half a ton instead of over an entire metric ton. And the Tomahawk costs between 2 and 4 million. The Flamingo costs less than $1 million, possibly considerably less than $1 million. So why would Zelensky be so keen on getting a Tomahawk, which costs much more, lower payload, shorter range? And it's not significantly, it might not be significantly better in stealth. It's very advanced for the 1980s. But the Flamingo is reasonably advanced for present day stealth capabilities, which has much more stealthy materials. So they may be roughly equal. So first of all, I hope this makes you much less scared already, because you're thinking, well, Trump is just selling them something that is actually less capable than what they have already. So this is why it's very unlikely that Putin will be able to do much by way of bluffs, because if he bluffs about this and say, well, but what about the Flamingo? That's much more capable. What are you talking about? What are you aiming about? So it's very unlike any of the previous things that the United States has given to Ukraine, which have always been more capable than what Ukraine has. So why does he want it? So then that leads to this idea, and this is the detailed comparison. I talked about all that. So so this is the idea of a psychological lever, and so some of you may have heard this already, but I'll just go into this quickly. So I'm not saying that this is what Zelensky actually has in mind. It's just that you should try and stop and think. He said very clearly that there's a system that Trump can sell him, that will enable him to, and he goes so far to say, get back all of occupied Ukraine. Imagine after all this fighting for 3.5 years, Trump gives him something or other, and then as a result, Putin gives it all up without a fight, without actually using this thing, whatever it is. And it's not going to be nukes. Russia's, Ukraine's very clear he doesn't want nukes, and the Nova US will give it to him. So what can it be? And so just stop and think. Then the Tomahawk is the only thing that anyone's talked about. So how giving Ukraine perhaps 100 Tomahawks, then how could that end the war? So I haven't heard anyone else suggest anything that makes any sense whatsoever of what Zelensky is saying. So this is my own idea. It's based on something that General Petraeus said a couple of years ago in a different context that led to me thinking about this idea, which is very close to what he was talking about. So the background here is that the Russian Black Sea Fleet, then it's of huge national pride and it's great cultural relevance, importance to the Russians, very much like the Royal Navy in the United Kingdom. And imagine if a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said, look, vote for me, I'm a wonderful Prime Minister. Oops, I just lost the Royal Navy. But never mind, that's just a mistake anyone could make. And I'm the very best Prime Minister to get back in power. It'd be like that for Putin if he lost the Black Sea Fleet. He has already lost the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, and he's lost a third of it. But that is something just through Ukraine with its long nephews and what it's got already. But that is something you can just kind of brush under the carpet, and he's still got kind of enough ships to make a reasonable kind of parade, a sea parade, and so he can just hide it from his people. They know that the flagship sunk, but they think it sunk because of an engine fire, and then in a heavy sea, and they don't know that the ordinary Russian doesn't know that it was sunk by Ukrainian missiles. So and then they just wouldn't know about the other ones. And so, but what if Putin was to say, "Oops, I've lost the entire Black Sea fleet"? He can't very well say a hurricane suddenly sunk them all on one day or something like that. So the idea is not to use it. The whole idea of this lever, it would achieve absolutely nothing for Ukraine to sink the entire Black Sea fleet. So don't expect Zelensky to start using his Flamingo to start sinking these ships, because that will achieve nothing whatsoever. It's of very little importance to the war now, but they are legitimately military targets because they do fire missiles at Ukraine from a distance, and so it's not like attacking the Kremlin, which would be completely forbidden in according to the law of war, and which the United States would never support and Zelensky would never do, or attacking civilians in Russia. So he wouldn't use them for that. He wouldn't have them as a lever for that and threaten that. But he can threaten the Black Sea Fleet because it's a genuine military target. Now, if this is what it's all about, and I just use this hypothesis, Zelensky knows Putin very well, he knows Russian culture very well, he's a native Russian speaker himself from birth, so he might have all sorts of other ideas, but this is the only thing that I can think of. So the way it would work, if this is what it is that Trump would give 100, say, Tomahawks. They've got hundreds of them, so that would be very easy to do. Sell 100 Tomahawks to Ukraine, which would cost them maybe $200 to $400 million. And then we might hear a few days or weeks after that Putin has agreed to negotiate with Zelensky, and then mysteriously the ceasefire is agreed, and maybe even Russia makes quite big concessions. And Zelensky thinks that claims that he could get back all of occupied Ukraine. But whether that's possible, whether that's just a very big chip in your big negotiating, starting the negotiation with a very big claim on your side before getting down to the actual business. But and then they would probably never say what, or you just leak it at some point later. But the aim is not to embarrass Putin. The aim is to get a ceasefire. And so because so the idea, the way it would work as a lever is just that by not using it, but Putin knows very well how the Tomahawk works, and he knows that from it was first introduced in 1989, 1980s, late 1980s for the Gulf War, and it was a miraculous weapon back then. People were very surprised by it, and I remember the people talking about it way back in the 1980s, and it was like a miracle missile, and so it's got this long reputation for going back decades, and Putin knows exactly what it can do. So so if Trump gives 100 of those to Zelensky, then Zelensky can use that as a lever without ever using it. Now, when it comes to the Flamingo, it's not got built up that history. It's only been developed this year, and we don't know how many Ukraine has. It might even have 100 by now. But if Zelensky says, "I've got 100 Flamingos," how does Putin know he's telling the truth? And then if Zelensky says, "Look, I can sink your entire Black Sea fleet with his Flamingos," how does Putin know that he's telling the truth there too? So I think it's the only thing, to my mind, that makes sense of Zelensky being so keen to get the Tomahawk. Now he's already got the Flamingo, and to pay over the odds for the Tomahawk when he can ramp up the Flamingo production, expects to be doing 7 a day by the end of this year. Why isn't he just investing as much as possible in that? Why would he spend 200 to 400 million on the Tomahawk when he can use that to build twice or more of the Flamingos, both or more capable than the Tomahawk for what he wants to do? And so I think it's because of its reputation and because he wants to use it with as a lever, have it as a lever without needing to use it to demonstrate what it can do, because it takes some time to build up the reputation of the Flamingo and what it can do. So, and before we know it, we don't have any, it's possible the early Flamingos, maybe things went wrong. It'd be quite surprising, not unsurprising, if some of the early attacks didn't go so very well for the Flamingo, and they're having to deal with some kinks in it as well. So it'd be that sort of a situation where he'd just say, well, look, I've got this well-proven system. Now, will you come and talk to us? So that's my understanding, my belief that this is what it's probably about. But just to give you an idea of what it could be, and try and think of other things yourself as to what it could be. Interested in any other suggestions as to how Zelensky, by having say 100 Tomahawks, could being put into the table without using it, ever using it. If your plan or scheme or idea involves actually using it, then it's not what he's talking about. So then I just want to talk about a few other things. First of all, the Ukraine has used supersonic US missiles to hit targets since this is subsonic actually, by the way, the Tomahawk, but it's using since October 2022, and this, for some reason, nobody talks about this. You've got to be a geek. So if you ask someone, the average person in the street, what did can you tell me what American missile did Ukraine use against targets in Russia in October 2022? Ask the average person, they say it wasn't hitting targets in Russia. Ask anyone who's kind of geeky and following the war closely and say, oh, that's the HARM, the anti-radar missiles, because they just never got into the news. I don't think they were very, very geeky news. That's the only place you heard about it. But this is a supersonic missile, twice the speed of sound. It homes in on radar and was destroying radar systems in Belgorod Oblast, and the first one was October 25th on the Belgorod Air Base, and several US of these missiles at supersonic speeds rushed in and destroyed their radar systems. And so this giving permission to use US weapons against Russian territory is not new at all, despite all the fuss about it when we were talking about whether Russia would agree to it. And the Russians never objected, probably because they weren't announced in advance. They just started doing it. So the bluffs are pointless once Ukraine already has them. So if it's done that way, then Russia tends to just not do anything, and it doesn't even mention them. So anyway, so just explaining that, and then just want to talk about what Ukraine is already doing, and it's with its own drones, its own missiles, and with the Flamingo, it'll be able to do this much more effectively. And remember, with Flamingo, it can do this at less cost and with greater impact. So it's been destroying oil refineries. So an oil refinery, just to understand, what an oil refinery does is that the crude oil that you dig up from the ground, it's got all sorts of tarry stuff mixed in it. You couldn't put it in your car. It's really not much use for anything much. So you have to put it in an oil refinery first. And then the oil refinery is a big structure. It's got lots and lots of oil and crude oil and refined oil flowing around through pipes and things. And it's quite easy with even a small drone with a few kilograms to set off a fire in an oil refinery. But looks spectacular. It doesn't achieve very much, and they can repair it in a few days. And up until late July this year, that's all that Ukraine was doing. Did quite a lot of spectacular attacks on oil refineries that just were short-term glitches. But starting in August, end of July 2025, and been doing that for a year or so, more than that, more and more often it was hitting these oil refineries and setting off fires. But starting the end of July into August, then it started doing much more serious attacks, which was noticed by these oil refineries just shutting down for for long periods of time, like periods of weeks. And the result of that is that Russia lost 17% of its oil refining capacity, of its total, the entire Russia's oil refining capacity by the end of August. So that's why they've got all these gasoline shortages in Russia, because they can't make the gasoline from the crude oil. They've got plenty of crude oil, but they can't make it into gasoline anymore. And it's the same, they're gradually getting shortages of the fuel for the war as well. So that's the idea. And then they also, with their drones, they have now, with the more capable, faster moving, longer distance drones with higher, heavier payloads, and it's possible some of these are Flamingos, they just don't disclose what they use them for. Then they stopped, first of all on September the 12th, they stopped the some of the oil exports from the Baltic Sea. That's not all, that's just part of it. And then they stopped oil exports in the Black Sea. $44 million. I was wondering that. Yeah, it's not millions of barrels. I'm not sure how many barrels it was. And then they stopped the oil exports in the Black Sea in September 25, and almost 100% of Russia's sea exports go through either the Baltic Sea or the Black Sea. And both of these are within range of their drones, including the Flamingos. Once they have more of those, then Ukraine can do a lot to stop those. So these are things that Ukraine is doing already. And yeah, so I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's rather getting away from the main point here. But yes, so that's why it's aiming to do that. So I don't want to go into all the details here. This is just, they just scroll through all this. These are all the oil refineries, and it's about over 90% of the oil refineries are within range. So they could pretty much shut down Russia's entire oil refinery business with the Flamingo drones once they've got plenty of them. And they don't need the Tomahawk for any of that. That's the main point. None of this needs the Tomahawk. And they can shut off the exports. So it does not need Tomahawk. None of these need the Tomahawk. So it's not needed to disrupt the oil, and it's got very capable missiles for other targets too, which is why it seems pretty clear they need it for psychological reasons rather than for the actual capacity now. And so that they can get 100 of them or more quickly, and Russia can verify that Ukraine has 100 Tomahawks by, well, it would just be, spies would be able to check what's going on. They'd be able to, the United States would be saying that it isn't. It would just be very clear to Russia that they actually do have 100 Tomahawks. And so, and then it could build 400 Flamingos with a double the payload, but it has to use them to prove them. Whereas with the Tomahawks, it doesn't need to use them. And so I think that's I think that's probably the reason. But whether that's the reason or not, the main thing is there's nothing here whatsoever to be worried about whatsoever. Nothing at all. Because it's much less. It's actually a less capable system than the Flamingo that Ukraine already has. And this might be. So then the mystery really is, why is Ukraine so keen to get hold of a less capable system that costs more? And why it doesn't put all that money into developing its own system, which will cost much less and is more capable. And it has to, I think it has to be for psychological reasons, which would fit in with Zelensky, what Zelensky is saying, that that he's something that he can actually achieve significant concessions from Russia without even using it. And so anyway, I'll give you a few things to think about here, and then the main thing is just that we've got people worrying about saying, isn't this escalating? People talking about escalating. This is actually making it easier for Ukraine to defend itself, and that reduces Russia's capability to attack Ukraine. Always, if the Allies give Ukraine something extra to help defend itself, then it doesn't mean that Russia is going to attack Ukraine more. It means Russia is going to attack Ukraine less. Always means that, because it's always stopping the Russian attacks. So this whole idea, if you give Ukraine more defences, it's escalatory. If you give it air defences, it's escalatory. Air defences stop the things coming in. Missiles stop. It can hit the factories that make the things that are fired at Ukraine. It's always defensive, so it always reduces Russia's capability. So I don't know why people keep on calling that escalatory, because it isn't. It doesn't make military sense to call that escalatory, to give Ukraine the capability to defend itself. So anyway, hopefully that all makes sense and be all a little bit clearer for you and be less scared. And this is kind of backing up, what Admiral Radakin was saying in my previous video, and that it really there's nothing here that's going to lead to anything except Ukraine being better able to protect itself and hopefully a way to get peace, kind of rather sooner rather than later. That's the hope.